Greetings, all you lovers of lore and legend, whether student, teacher, parent, teller of tales, or cuneiform romance enthusiasts.
The Great Tales podcast is a podcast about myths and legends from both inside and outside the Christian tradition, and we come to you live twice a month to talk about these great stories that Christians have been reading and passing on for centuries, and sometimes even longer than that.
Yeah, last time, to everyone's complete surprise and utter shock, and even dismay, we talked Beowulf, and Richard had no idea why that happened. One listener wrote in and said it had something remotely to do with Richard's well-known affection for ogres who live in swamps.
So speaking of swamp ogres, today we have invited our friend, Father Stephen DeYoung, a friend of the show, one might even say, who's mainly known for popping into YouTube live streams without warning, although he usually leaves after snapping the bones of their hosts and eating them in great gulping gobbets, as well as for his newfound, and I have to say, hilariously perplexing career of posting gaming clips on his own channel without any context whatsoever. Today, we've asked him to come and take a break from all of that to talk to us about the Epic of Keret, which is, did I say that right? Keret? Is it the Epic of Keret? How do we say that, Father?
Well, Keret or Kirta, if you want to be.
Kirta. Yeah, all right.
We can talk about why there's different pronunciations.
Yes.
So,
you can get as nerdy as you like with the linguistic.
This is an Ugaritic text lost in the Syrian desert for some 3,500 years. However, before we let him take us back far into the sands of the desert and into the sands of time, I have to say that this is the first time that Father Stephen DeYoung and I have ever actually appeared on the same podcast together. I don't know how he's avoided me this long. But some of you will know, I certainly know this, because every time that he calls me out on the Lord of Spirits, I get about 8 different text messages from the same people who are like, "Oh, Father Stephen just called you out again." And very often these little reposts between the two of us have taken the form of pro wrestling style call outs. And so it is in that spirit that I would just like to go ahead and introduce today's text, if you would both allow me. Well, let me tell you something, brother. King Keret ain't just some ancient footnote buried in the sands of time, dude. He's a legend that got lost in the shuffle for over 3,000 years, buried deeper than Ozymandias himself, Jack. But now the Epic of Keret is back, and it's ready to shake the very foundations of history, brother. You see, Keret wasn't just any king, he was the son of the Most High God El, the big man of the Canaanite pantheon. But even demigods gotta face the trials of life, dude. His wife, gone. His 7 kids, donezo. And with his kingdom on the line, he did what any true warrior would do. He turned to his old man and prayed for a divine tag team partner, brother. And just when you thought history had left him down and out for the count, archaeologists in the 1930s dug up the ancient city of Ugarit, north of modern-day Latakia, Syria, and boom! The lost histories of Canaanite mythology came crashing down like a steel cage match, shaking up everything we knew about the ancient world. Scholars cracked open the Ugaritic language like a folding chair over the head of mystery. And suddenly, passages in the Hebrew Bible that had been foggy started making sense, dude. Now, Father Stephen DeYoung is stepping into the ring to lay the smackdown on the forgotten history of King Keret, brother. He's breaking down ancient poetry, the myth, and the raw human struggle of a king who had everything ripped away from him. So what are you gonna do when the Epic of Keret runs wild on you?
Wow. That may be the cheesiest thing that I've had to witness in a long time.
I warned you I was going to do that. I told you last week.
So two notes. Number one, you're welcome. You're welcome for making you famous, Reinhardt.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
And secondly, since you chose to go with Hogan, you are going to get booed out of the building now. You realize?
I accept.
I don't know if you've been following wrestling recently, but he's been.
I actually have been following wrestling recently because everybody was apparently all of my friends were like, yeah, we're going to be off of social media for Lent, and then they immediately came back on like the second day of Lent to be like, oh, John Cena, yeah, just made a heel turn. It's like, okay, all right. So anyway,
take a break while you guys discuss all this. Yeah. So anyway,
is John Cena the carrot of the modern world?
I'm just going to let you guys know that I strongly considered, just to really, for the sake of Matushka Trudy mainly, I really strongly considered coming in a Hulk Hogan costume to today's episode, but it was more trouble than it was going to be worth this week.
Thank you for
to
keeping
put that
your
together.
shirt on.
Yeah, and also I would have had to have shaved my beard, which I'm not willing to do. So,
but I don't know if you can pull off the Fu Manchu skullet combo.
Exactly. Listen. You know, I looked into like okay, so I'd have to get a bald cap, and then because they make these Hulk Hogan bald caps that have just the stringy yellow hair on them. Wow. And so I did do some research into this.
Wow.
So
what is happening? Yeah. Welcome, Father Stephen. We are talking today. You know, a lot of people have written in actually, and they're like, when are you going to do, I mean, literally this is only our 9th episode, and we've gotten a lot of people writing in like, when are you going to do something that's not Indo-European or something? And, well, here we are. I mean, this is the oldest thing we've talked about. This is definitely
I've got bad news for you.
Oh no.
Keret was probably an Indo-European.
Oh,
our people are everywhere.
Well, that should be interesting. Yeah, and
I mean, just legitimately, literally, that's a factual statement.
Yeah. I mean, also we should say that, like Richard and I are not scholars of this kind of literature. I mean, we've read a lot of this sort of stuff, but this is not our thing, which is why we brought Father Stephen on, because this is much more his thing. So I don't know about you, Richard, but my preparation for this is I read the text, and I read some of the scholarly bits in the critical edition of the text that I read, and that's it. I haven't done a bunch of extra searching. So for me, it's just I know the story, and that's all. So I'm ready to hear all kinds of fun background info, you know. And Father Stephen, you did promise to blow our minds, so I'm ready. I have my mind insulated, so it doesn't completely explode here in the studio. That would be kind of gross.
Well, that could have multiple meanings in this case too. But the reason I say it was probably Indo-European is that most people think this story is of Hurrian origins. And the Hurrians were a group related to the Hittites in Asia Minor and Indo-Europeans.
So, and that's why everything goes back to Troy, ultimately, people. So, there you go.
Yeah.
I think so this is, so the version we have was, and there's good evidence that it was copied. So that what we have is a copy.
Okay.
Because you could see places where they kind of were doing a correction, which you wouldn't have if somebody was just composing something.
Yeah.
Necessarily. But so it's considered to be a copy, and it's from the 14th century BC. So, and the tablets, so clay tablets that you write on with cuneiform are way smaller than most people envision.
Yeah, they're like handheld, right? They're like
right, because you would literally take a handful of clay, and their hands were a lot smaller than mine. But you literally take a handful of clay and then use the reed to press into it and then fire it. And once they're fired, the tablet as a whole is really durable, but you can lose stuff around the edges. Mm-hmm. So that's why you'll find, like, if people track down the critical edition of the Keret Epic, they'll notice these lacunae in places.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's like at the beginning and at the end and at,
Yeah. If you look, I mean,
points,
like we're going to show some of the text on screen today. and people will see all kinds of brackets. We're just showing the English text, everybody. But what the brackets represent often is where scholars have filled in stuff that's missing. And I mean, usually it's just bits of words, but in some cases it's multiple lines. And then there's some where there's whole passages where it's like 75% brackets. And
think of them like the italicized text in your King James Bible.
Or even more than that in some cases. But one of the reasons, I mean, as we get into this, we'll see this a little bit, but one of the reasons that they're able to fill in some of these bits is sometimes it's conjecture from context. But also, one of the things I noticed in this text is there's a whole lot of repetition.
Right.
So that's helpful when you have bits that are fragmentary, but then you have much more complete versions of it. Maybe later on is what it often is the case, and so they can guess based on the fragments. Oh, this is actually the same thing that appears later. So even though there's lots of bits missing, there's enough to put together the story.
Right.
So I actually want to take an opportunity here. I don't know if this is the first time I've attempted this on the internet to actually you, Father Stephen. And I'm pretty sure that this is a slip of the tongue on your part.
Yes.
But when you mentioned Ugarit or Ugarit, I don't know. Of course, we have no Ugaritic people to tell us.
No native speakers in this conversation.
Which one is correct? Yeah,
we can say it however we want.
You have often said that it was found in Lebanon, but it is in fact in Syria because it's just north of Latakia. So
maybe I'm just saying Lebanon is part of Syria.
The Levant, yeah, there we go. Yeah. the Lebanon. And you're still thinking of Lebanon in Ottoman terms.
It's at this point that I have to mention that Latakia in Syria is where one of the most important varieties of pipe tobacco originally comes from. Although most of it you have to get from the island of Cyprus now. But it is called Latakia, and it is pipe tobacco which has been dried over burning camel dung.
Of course it has.
And it has a very smoky, camel dungy sort of aroma.
Yeah. And I mean, Latakia, of course, is the Arabic and probably Turkish pronunciation of one of the cities named Laodicea.
Right.
Laodicea. But anyway, so this is where we are. We're in northern Syria on the coast, just north of Latakia, what is now Latakia. And Ugarit was founded again, as we like to say in Lord of Spirits, adjust your dates as needed, but probably about 7,000 BC, right? And lasted until about 1,200, 1,500 BC.
Yeah. There was a Neolithic settlement there. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. So we're talking, this is one of the oldest places in the world. And an incredibly long-lasting settlement. I mean, that was thousands of years that it existed. That's crazy. So, Father, why don't you just give us a context? Most people probably have never heard of Ugarit or Ugaritic. What's the importance of this place? Why are these clay tablets that were found?
Yeah.
What's going on? What is cuneiform? Just give us the basic intro for most of our people who've just been reading King Arthur for a lot of their lives and have never looked into this truly, truly old stuff.
Yeah, I lose interest in the world around 400 AD. So I don't know.
We'll take it from there.
What most of the stuff you guys are talking about even is. But yeah, so Ugarit was a relatively important city because it lay along trade routes. It was not, it was not Babylon. It was not one of the several capitals of Egypt. It was not, right? But it was like Jericho, another ancient city in the Levant. Jericho even older by a couple thousand years. Dates adjusted accordingly. It was on trade routes and managed to maintain its independence as a city-state for a long time. One of the things that makes it important to us is that it wasn't rebuilt. So Jericho is an older site, but of course there was, several layers of Jerichos, right, all the way up to the present day.
Which, I mean, and that
built one on top of another.
And that destroys older stuff or makes it harder to get to, right? And harder to work out when stuff is from and that kind of thing.
Right. And it's only very recently that a thing like archaeology existed.
Yeah.
So people didn't think like, oh, I dug down and I found this old thing, I need to preserve it. It was, what's this junk? Or can I repurpose this rock for something else?
Right.
For like, some other building project.
Sort of the antiquarianism that we now have that creates museums and so forth is a recent, like just the last couple hundred years, really kind of feeling.
Yeah. So where you have continuous settlement, you tend to lose a lot of things, right? That's why it was such a big deal when like Pompeii was discovered, because nothing had ever been built on top of it. And so everything had remained kind of preserved as it was. Ugarit similarly. So Ugarit falls during the Bronze Age collapse, when pretty much everything did. We're not sure exactly what got them. It was probably, there was a whole combo platter in the Bronze Age collapse at the end of the second millennium BC of the Sea Peoples invading. Part of why they were invading was climate change. Yeah. Even though no one had cars, climate patterns were changing. And that led to famine in a bunch of areas. You couldn't grow crops, which caused people in the ancient world to migrate. And those migrations then start fights over the land once they get there.
Yeah, what's that?
And so, but Ugarit falls and all of that, and is sort of never rebuilt. So the area now is called Ras Shamra. Then when it's found in the 1930s and discovered there, everything is sort of the way it was when it collapsed in the 12th century BC.
Yeah.
And nothing had sort of been messed with, nothing had been taken. And in particular, we found a wealth of the clay tablets we were just talking about, with a variety of different kinds of texts.
Yeah, and as I recall, like most of them are valuable but boring, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, they're interesting to select groups of people and not necessarily
that's right.
people.
Like there are some people for whom, a shipping manifest from the 13th century BC is super duper interesting.
Right, because they're studying the trade. They're studying international trade and trade routes.
Right.
So that's their whole thing. So they're really into that.
And there's a lot of these that have still never been translated, by the way. So you just never know what's hanging out in those piles and piles of tablets. So get on it, folks.
Yeah. But with Ugaritic, what makes it sort of especially important is that even though it's written in cuneiform, which everything was, and we can come back to how cuneiform works, but it is a Semitic language. It is essentially a dialect of Old Canaanite, which means it's sort of a dialectic cousin to Hebrew, to biblical Hebrew, and later Aramaic and other Semitic languages. So it is later than Akkadian by about 1,000 years. And so closer to... Akkadian is sort of like Sanskrit for Indo-European languages. Akkadian is for Semitic languages.
I like how you just made an analogy, which like two people in the chat will get.
Okay, well...
What Father Stephen is referring to...
you're always talking about Indo-Europeans.
Is the fact, right. Well, yeah, okay, so the Indo and Indo-European...
20 people in the chat. 20 people in the chat.
20 people in the chat, yeah. Okay, so the just so people know, the reason we use Sanskrit so much in Indo-European studies is because it's very, very old, and there's quite a lot, relatively speaking, there's quite a lot written down in it. And so it gives us something that's really old, probably the oldest thing that we have, with one or two exceptions, maybe including Hittite actually, but it's basically it's cognate with ancient Greek and a bunch of other things, and so it's just really important for comparative studies.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. So an Akkadian, which is the language that was used by, for example, the Babylonian Empire, is that for Semitic languages.
Right.
They're all related to it. But there's sort of a big gap between Akkadian and Biblical Hebrew in time. And Ugaritic is much closer to the Biblical Hebrew end of that. And like all Semitic languages, you basically write the consonants. You record the consonants. And then those consonants are vocalized in certain ways, which we tend to think of as vowels being added, but is really, that's looking at it from our perspective where we have vowels and consonants in our alphabet.
I actually had a question for you about how this works re cuneiform, because isn't cuneiform a syllabary? So you're not...
That's why we have these different pronunciations like Keret and Kirta.
Yeah.
Which although I mean that close.
Like if you look, this is an interesting thing. So if you look at Keret, which is often spelled Keret in Latin letters, and then Kirta, Kirta, what they have in common is the same consonants in the same order, K-R-T.
Right. So there is this unanswerable question about Ugaritic. It's unanswerable because we don't have someone to speak it. Right. So there are two schools of thought. One school of thought is this language was vocalized in a way similar to Old Canaanite and Biblical Hebrew, which gives you Keret. Right. The other school of thought is, no, the phonetic cuneiform alphabet is accurately recording the way this was spoken, which gives you Kirta.
Got it.
Right. So the question is, were they sort of doing their best with cuneiform as the only writing system available to them to reflect how they spoke it? Or is that an accurate reflection of spoken Ugaritic? And as I said, we will never know.
Yeah.
Barring finding a TARDIS, right? Yeah. Like we'll never actually.
Yeah. Like a modern example of this kind of thing, although we do know how it's pronounced because we have actual living speakers, but a modern example of this kind of thing that can befuddle English speakers is there is a Pacific Island nation which is spelled Kiribati, and you look at that and you think that's Kiribati, but it's actually Kiribati. And the reason that it's that is because that TI at the end, they took the French pronunciation of that, and that's their orthography.
My old enemies, the French.
Yeah, unless you know that, then you're going to look at that and say Kiribati,
Yeah.
That's the same kind of thing, is they're using this orthography to represent their language in a way that might go one way, it might go another.
And just to also say, there's a very storied tradition of lots of different languages essentially using the same cuneiform writing system.
Yes.
For thousands of years, like well into the Achaemenid Empire. They're still using basically cuneiform.
Now there were the main changes. So as cuneiform develops, it starts out like Sumerian tablets that we have. And Sumerian is a completely different language, but it is a language isolate. It is related to nothing. The only relationship it has is that Sumer and Akkad were the two big regions in Mesopotamia. And so Akkadian sort of took over certain Sumerian words, like loan words. But other than that, Sumerian isn't related to anything. But the Sumerian cuneiform is very pictographic still.
Yeah.
The pictographs are not always obvious to us, right? But you can kind of squint. I mean, some of them are obvious, like a bull looks kind of like a bull, and you can kind of squint at some of them and see them. And so it's not like hieratic Egyptian, where the pictographs are sort of very clear in most cases. It's
like, look, there's a man, there's an arrow,
there's
a
eye.
hat.
Yeah,
exactly.
But it evolves away from that and becomes its own thing over time. Even in Akkadian, it's really moved past the pictographic stage. But then what happens is over time, the number of symbols sort of gets winnowed down.
Yep.
I think this is something that's happened in the development of like Chinese, right? Like where you have hundreds and hundreds of symbols in early Akkadian cuneiform, literally hundreds. And so, realistically, when you study it, you have to learn a subset of that.
Right.
And historically, just realistically, scribes began using primarily a subset of that were the most common ones. And so over time, the more uncommon ones just sort of start to get forgotten and dropped out because it's not like people have lexica, right? That kind of thing. So the later cuneiform gets boiled down eventually to about 60 symbols, which makes reading it much easier. That's much easier than the other way. It's still not real easy to read. I'm going to be honest. Like if I'm going to work with an Ugaritic text, I don't work with it in cuneiform. I work with it in transliteration. There's sort of a standard transliteration. If you get the critical edition, that's what it has. It doesn't reproduce the cuneiform. It has the standard transliteration.
So
of the Ugaritic.
I have a question. So it's my understanding that these the Ugaritic, I don't know, mythological texts, right? So this is the stuff that we're interested in. That largely speaking, with the exception of like biblical references to Baal, because that's probably the biggest. That's not what we're talking about today, but that's the biggest set of texts from Ugarit that
somebody should write a book about that.
Yeah, how about that? That's an idea. Just put that on your to-do list, Father.
Yeah.
Aside from some biblical references to the Baal story, largely these stories are just disappear until they're dug up again in the early 20th century. Is that right? Or are there some references to them or...
Well, yeah. So this is... Yeah. Okay, so... this let me go back to something and then I'll segue into the answer to this.
Okay. Before we get actually starting talking at the actual text itself, which everybody, we're going to go through the whole text, not line by line.
It's not that
we're going to
long,
go through.
but
it's not that long. It's not that long.
It's 3 tablets. Yeah. Multiple columns on each tablet, but still. So the reason Ugaritic is so important is because it's so closely related to biblical Hebrew. And people don't realize that about 30% of the Hebrew Bible consists of words that are only used once in the Hebrew Bible.
Which, that makes it hard to read.
Right. So there are words that were literally being sort of best guess, or where people were sort of reading back from the Greek. Okay, well, they translated it as this in Greek, so, right. There are places where, well, I don't care. There are places where we can see now that a lot of the Greek versions mistranslated things because by the time you get to the 3rd century BC... Excuse me,
I just have to tweet something.
I don't care. They can all at me. Septuagint doesn't exist there. But by the 3rd century BC, when they started translating into Greek, a lot of these words were super archaic and had been forgotten.
Yeah.
So some of them Akkadian helped, right? You could go back into Akkadian and be like, oh, well, here's the etymology of this word at least. That would give us a clue. But the Ugaritic find, now we've got something, right? These texts from the 13th, 14th century BC. We've got something closer to biblical Hebrew. Now we can sort of connect the dots on a lot of these words that we didn't know for sure before. So it's been this huge boon and because of this, you will see here and there, like in biblical studies, Old Testament programs especially, they'll do like, here, learn a little Ugaritic, because if you know biblical Hebrew well, then picking up like biblical Aramaic or Ugaritic, other than the cuneiform script, is sort of like you're fluent in Latin and you want to learn French and Spanish, right? Like you're already way ahead of the game. It's a question of some different vocalizations because the consonants are the same in these roots. But so and then of course we have like the Baal cycle that was found there. We have a wide collection. One of the things that people talk about the least, but that is really interesting, we have a lot of ritual texts from Ugarit about the sort of on-the-ground here's the daily, monthly, weekly, yearly cycle of sacrifices and feasts and
a fair number of things that are basically the rough equivalent of like spells too, right?
Yeah, magical texts. Yeah. Curse texts, blessing texts. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. But the Baal epic, there are certain things like the Baal epic, especially as you mentioned, that we see some clear parallels of things, right? In passages, some of the passages are already in the Bible, just on the face, dealing with Baal and Baal worshippers and Baal stuff, right? Others, it's more sub rosa. Now that we have the text, we're like, oh, this is playing off of that idea from Baal worshippers. So Baal being sort of the main god who is worshipped in Canaan and Syria at this point. There's regional differences in Syria, and I won't go into all the relationships between Baal and Hadad and all that stuff for these purposes, but he's sort of the major god there. So, but here's the thing. This is one of the potentially mind-blowing things. Scholars get excited about new finds and things. And not only do we have these new finds from Ugarit, but the other thing that's gotten scholars really excited is the whole idea of intertextuality, which is something that now seems very obvious to people, but was not obvious to people until the 1980s for various reasons. That's and so, the idea that, there's all these connections between, the Bible and other literature at the time period, right? And people get excited about that, and then you kind of get overexcited. Okay. So are you ready for one of the potentially mind-blowing things? When you read the Epic of Keret, either of you,
yes,
did you think to yourself, wow, I think the book of Joshua is plagiarized from this?
Job, maybe.
Yeah, I'll say the two bits that the two biblical references that came to me was Job was my first thought, because here's a guy, we're going to get into this. This is the very first column of the first tablet. Here's a guy who's lost his whole family, but then also at the very, very end, spoiler alert. But of course, I think that the statute of limitations is out in a text that's 3,500 years old. Spoiler alert, at the very end, there was stuff that struck me as very similar to Psalm 82, right? Those were the two bits. But no, it did not occur to me, Joshua is connected to any
Well, it is going scholarly opinion that the book of Joshua is plagiarized from
nice.
Okay.
The Epic of Keret.
So, but why?
Nice.
Are you ready for the dramatic parallels?
Okay, hit me.
Both Joshua and Keret go on a 7-day journey to a city.
That's it?
No. This is just the beginning.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. All right.
That journey is interrupted by receiving divine instructions.
Okay.
Then both of them lay siege to a city for 7 days. Joshua marches around Jericho, and Keret is encamped around the city. In both cases, nothing happens for 6 days, and then on the 7th day, something happens.
I mean, this is just good
sort of implied by a 7-day siege. Yes,
right.
and then we've got to go and throw a lasso around the story of Achan, which isn't even the same story,
right?
And dragging it, but you have someone like break a vow to a god, kind of. See in both stories.
Wow.
So clearly plagiarized.
Clearly.
Yep. I mean, my faith is completely shaken.
Yeah.
Yes.
It'll never recover from this.
Okay.
I can't
all
believe
that said,
the Bible anymore.
All that said, then why don't we go ahead and just dive into the actual text? Okay. So as Father said, this is divided into 3 tablets, and then each tablet has, I think, 6 columns on it.
Yeah. Let me make one more note before you do that.
Yeah.
Just about the repetition, something about the style, since we're going to be looking at it.
Yeah.
So this is a common thing in Semitic poetry, right? Is First of all, you do double line parallels. You can see this all over the place in the Psalms if you want to see a whole bunch of examples of it, but you'll see a lot of it here, where you'll have two basically synonymous statements, one after the other, right, to sort of reinforce an idea. Anything in Ugaritic reads as very clipped because it's written in cuneiform, right? And that's sort of, you get very clipped sentences. There aren't a lot of like verb tenses. There aren't a lot of, you can't really do flowery, right? So you get very clipped sentences, but you get these parallels set up that are either going to be identical or they're going to be opposite, exact opposites of each other. And then you get the repetition of whole sections, like to sort of reinforce. And that's why, as you said, that helps a lot in terms of filling in gaps in the text. If you could make out enough of it to say, oh, this is repeating what was over there, you can then fill in.
And
so
that's why
just something as people look at it, why it's
and that's why for some of this, we're not going to go with every single line. We're going to summarize some parts, but we're going to highlight a lot of the most significant passages. So so Richard, why don't you begin by reading this first column? And we should note here, everybody, that there's one line. Actually, there's like the last fifth of a line is what survives. And then there's missing 5 lines. And then we get into it. And then the end of that column is missing another 7 lines. So again, it's a little bit fragmentary. This first part is a little bit fragmentary. Some of the columns are just a mess in terms of what's left on there. But again, it's mostly still all there. We have enough that we can tell the kind of story. So Richard, why don't you go ahead and begin?
That will improve in the future, actually, believe it or not.
There's apparently some
because
AI stuff
computer scanning tools. Yeah, they've got computer scanning and imaging tools where they could find stuff that you can't necessarily see with the human eye, but the faint remains of impressions and stuff.
And this translation that we've got, this is from a book called Ugaritic Narrative Poetry, which people can go look at. This actually represents a fairly advanced stage of, a fairly advanced stage of analyzing this text. So the earliest published versions were much more fragmentary, and then they had a lot of science that they applied to it and got a better text. So this is a more advanced stage of that, and probably we'll find more in the future. So
and I'll just say that there will be 0 downsides to training AI on a bunch of ancient Ugaritic magical texts. It'll be fine. No downsides.
It'll be good. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Concerning or belonging to Kirta. The house of a king has perished, a house with 7 brothers, even 8 mothers' sons. Kirta, his progenies ruined. Kirta, his line is sundered. A proper wife he'd found, yes, and rightly wed. He wed a wife, she departed. She'd had a mother's brood, a 3rd died in health, a 1/4 by disease, a 5th was gathered by Rashap, a 6th by the lad of Yam, a 7th part by the sword it was felled. He sees his progeny, Kirta, he sees his progeny ruined, his dynasty utterly sundered. So all his descendants have perished, in some the lot of his heirs. He enters into his chamber, he cries, an inner alcove, and weeps. His tears are poured forth like shekels on the ground, like 5 weights on the couch. As he cries, he falls asleep. As he weeps, there's slumber. Sleep overwhelms him. He lies down, slumber, and he crumples. Now in his dream, El comes down, the father of man in his vision. Now El approaches, asking Kirta, what ails Kirta that he cries, that he weeps, the pleasant lad of El? Is it kingship, like his father he wants, or dominion, like the father of man? And then there's probably about 7 lines missing here at the end, with Kirta being offered various things.
Yeah, is what they think it is. So we get the basic idea. His wife is dead, all his kids are dead, and there's some interesting references here that you could probably help us unpack, Father. So it says that there's some God references here, right? So this is kind of this is the good stuff. Yeah. So when it's the poem is listing off how the kids died, it says a 3rd died in health, a 1/4 by disease, a 5th was gathered by Reshep. What's going on there? I think I recognize that name.
Yes, that's our old friend Reshep, who's not our friend.
Friend of the show.
Yeah. No, he's not a friend to anybody, really. One of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yeah. Moldy Canaanite gods, right?
Yes, he is a... so Reshef, very popular in the Semitic world. So popular, he ends up in Egypt in the New Kingdom. Getting added to the pantheon. And there's good evidence that a lot of early stage worship of Apollo in Asia Minor was actually a version of Reshef. He's generally depicted as an archer who shoots like plagued arrows.
Yeah.
Reshef is mentioned several times in the Old Testament. It usually gets translated as plague in our English translations. They don't
the arrow
translate
that
it as the proper name.
The arrow that flieth by day.
Yeah.
Is that? Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a reference in Job to the Reshefs plural, right? Sort of coming out. So yeah, all those things about arrows and darts, and in Psalm 90 or 89, those are Reshef references. And the Apollo stuff is, if you look at some very archaic Greek, you get Apollo shooting plague arrows at people. Yeah. You're kind of like, wait, I thought he was the sun god, and like
such as for instance, in a little text called the Iliad.
Yeah,
exactly.
Just as one example.
Yeah. So this means that these children of Keret or Kirta die through some kind of like sudden disease.
Well, but that they saw that, sees that as a supernatural element, right? Because there's reference to disease as such right before that.
That's right. Right. Yeah. Oh, thank you very much there for that.
I just wanted to make sure everyone saw the T-shirt for the week.
That's right, because this is one of our running references on the show.
That's right.
So whenever you see a T-shirt from Richard, you're encouraged to donate to Ancient Faith Ministries.
That's right. Yeah, I just want to remind people, donate to Ancient Faith Ministries T-shirt fund. It's a fund funded by T-shirts. None of the money goes towards making T-shirts.
That's right. Exactly. So then it says a 6th by the lad of Yam. Is this Nahar, the god of the rivers?
Yes.
Okay.
So probably implying that they drowned, but again, that they saw they're seeing a supernatural agency in it. So the idea is it's not just Keret has been unfortunate, right? It's that he's sort of cursed, right? He's
yeah. And I mean, and then at the end, it El, who is the Most High God at this point, presumably this is post-Baal cycle, narratively speaking, or I don't. Yeah. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't.
Well,
is El the Most High God in this?
You have to.
Is it all like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and this is like a Phase 3 epic?
Right, so that's the problem, right?
Yeah,
the Baal cycle is a cycle; it repeats.
Right.
Right, and there are parts of the Baal cycle where El is kind of conspiring against Baal, because Baal is kind of taking over for El also.
Yeah,
right? Like, and you've got his wife and El's daughter threatening to cave his skull in if dear old dad doesn't build a palace for Baal. Post haste.
Yeah.
Literally threatening to cave his skull.
Yeah.
In fact, the Baal cycle actually opens. I mean, this isn't the actual beginning, but the beginning of what we have with El kind of conspiring with Yam. Like, El's kind of being a rat and like telling Yam that Baal's out to get him, and trying to get Yam to go and ambush Baal and do something about him. And for some reason, that particular argument takes the form of Yam being afraid he's going to get his genitals cut off, and El telling him to cut off Baal's first, and then you won't have to worry about it.
We should have given a parental advisory here at the beginning.
I just want to say it wasn't me this time.
Yeah.
Well, we knew what we were getting into. So okay,
but you
anyways,
see that motif in Uranus, Uranus, and Cronus.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Exactly. Because I mean, it has to do with a sense of like controlling life itself, controlling generation, controlling the ability to give life.
Yeah.
And if you cut that off from somewhere else, then it belongs to you theoretically. Then yes, but in any event, like
So
El is
Most High God becomes an increasingly distant figure.
Yeah, but he's
There's not
very
a lot of
involved.
worship of El.
He's very involved in this story.
Right.
This is the one.
Keret is.
Right.
But
it says that he's the lad
Keret-
of El.
Is Keret is he like a local hero in the old sense? Like a local hero demigod, and this is his story? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, he is divine and human. And as one of the divine kings, he's a member of the council of the gods. So he's one of the sons of El. So that's why he sort of has access to El, right? Because he is divine himself, right? So your average person was not worshiping El or interacting with El at all. They were worshiping Baal.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Right. I mean, it's interesting that the way that El chooses to talk to him here is he falls into a sleep and he speaks to him in this dream. So that probably represents a certain level of distance where he's like he's not Baal, like he's not the one who presides in the divine council.
Right.
He's this other son of El.
Right.
Yeah.
He's a half human, right? So.
Yeah. Okay, so, all right, we're going to move on to the second column in the first tablet. I'm just going to summarize most of this, but I am going to read a little bit of it, right? So basically, Keret says, so after El says, do you want, why are you crying? Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this? This is why scholars think that that's what those missing lines are, because after that, Keret says, I don't want any of that stuff. I need sons. That's what I need. I need sons. And so El tells Keret, this is still in the dream, stop crying, go clean yourself up. And then he says to him, you need to offer various kinds of sacrifices, right? A lamb, a couple of goats, wine, honey. Lord of Spirits listeners, of course, recognize that all these things are food because that's what sacrifices are. And then one of the things that El says to him is, I'm going to read this passage, ascend to the top of the lookout, mount the city wall's shoulder, raise your hands toward the sky, sacrifice to Bull El, your father, adore Baal with your sacrifice, Dagon's son with your offering. And then El tells Kirta, go get all your provisions and your men together for an army. This is interesting to me. Like it says, go up, which is a pretty normal thing to do for a sacrifice. Go on a mountain, go on your rooftop, whatever. And then he says, raise your hands toward the sky, and then it's a sacrifice to El, and the reference to Bull El, who's your father, and then also sacrifice to Baal, and then it identifies Baal as Dagon's son. Like, what is that all? I thought Baal was El's son. I mean, are Dagon and El the same god, or? And I mean, isn't Dagon the god of the Philistines, if I'm remembering correctly from the Bible?
Yes, he does show. Yeah, sort of.
Sort of. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Help us unpack this. All these God references here now.
And is Bull El, is that like a Kryptonian thing, or what's the deal?
Nice.
No. So.
Bull El.
Yeah, there are. Now that I think about it, there are a lot of like Canaanite, sort of like Jack's Ur has it. Anyway,
I'm just. Hey, listen. The fact that you just made a Losh reference is like.
Yeah. So, so Dagon is worshipped by the Philistines is really that, or Dagon is actually how it's pronounced.
That doggone god.
Yeah, beat me to it.
I have to say, by the way, since you pronounce it that way, see, I can bring in a little bit of lore that no one else knows in my circles. Dagon is actually the Tsamoru, which that's the native language of Guam and Saipan. It is the Tsamoru word for one's bottom end. And it is a word that every kid in school knows, because if they don't sit still, then the teacher will make reference, sit on that. Anyways, I just have to put that out there. Since we're insulting pagan gods, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
This one is, would be hilarious to a Tsamoru speaker.
Yeah. So that's yeah. And it means literally something like little fish, or the fish in Hebrew. And so there's pretty broad agreement now, especially now we know where the Philistines came from, that was actually probably Dawn, that they changed it to, as in Poseidon. That's, yeah. Because the Philistines were Cretans. So there you go.
And all Cretans are liars?
I got your joke. Yeah. I got that.
I got it.
Yeah. I got that.
So, yeah. So in this case, this Dagon is not really El. That's he's in the deity lists as one of the sons of El. And so everyone assumes that son of Dagon must still be referring to Baal, but not necessarily. This could be two different gods. And saying, include both of them, because it's sort of a sacrifice to El, but he's saying,
well, you've got Bull El, and then Baal, right, and then maybe also a third, right?
Bull El is a common epithet for
El. Is that Baal normally?
There's also a Bull Baal. No, there's a Bull Baal too.
Oh, okay.
The bull is sort of a title here.
Yeah.
That's ascribing aspects of early bull worship, right, to that deity, saying that they're the bull of heaven, right, is a way of ascribing glory to them. So you'll find in worship of Baal him being referred to as Bull Baal. There's a whole literal thing that you probably don't want me to go into detail about
right,
Bull Baal.
Right. Exactly. Like beyond R-rated.
Parental advisory.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the Bull El is there as sort of an honorific, right? But yeah, it's possible that son of Dagon is for some reason another name for Baal, for the same figure. It's also possible that this is two different entities. But Dagon is on we have deity lists. So lists of the 70 sons of El, who make up sort of the divine council on Mount Zaphon, are present in the Ugaritic texts. So, and he is on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so, yeah, when you went to offer sacrifice, you went to the highest point in the city, which at this point, they weren't building ziggurats per se, right, in the cities. And so that was often the walls. You see that in the Bible too, right? For example, the king of Moab, when they're laying siege to the city, he goes up on the city walls and sacrifices his son.
And that
to Chemosh.
God was not happy with that. I don't know if you guys know, but
displeased.
I've
very
read that, actually.
Very real big displeasure.
Yeah.
At that.
Yeah.
I taught through in another life. I taught through the entire books of the kingdoms for my Baptist Sunday school class, and for like 6 years or something. And we got to that story, and everybody was people were like. Not everybody, but some people were like, why is God so upset that a pagan sacrificed a pagan? Like, what's the big deal? Like, they're all bad guys. And I was like, okay, I don't know where to start exactly. Human sacrifice is bad.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who's doing it or who you're doing it to. It's always bad.
Yeah.
And then they pulled out Jephthah on you, and then
they did not pull out Jephthah.
Pointed out that if you say Jephthah isn't a saint, you're making war against the Orthodox Church.
Nobody brought that up at the Baptist church where I was serving at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, all right. Moving on to column 3. Richard, why don't you go ahead and, again, we've summarized some parts of this.
The third column. Here we go.
Yes, the third column of Tablet 3. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what goes on in this column?
Yeah, so El tells Kirta or Keret to go to the city of Udum and attack the outlying towns. And then the king, I think, Pabuli, is going to offer tribute in exchange for peace. For Udum is a gift of El, a grant from the Father of Man. And then Keret basically says he does not want stuff. What is not in my house you must give me. You must give me Lady Huraya, the fair one, your firstborn child, who's as fair as the goddess Anath, who's as comely as Astarte, whose eyes are lapis lazuli, eyeballs gleaming alabaster, who'll transfix me. Something breaks off, maybe for the best. I'll repose in the gaze of her eyes, whom El has given me in my dream. Father of man in my vision, who will bear a child for Kirta, a lad for the servant of El. And then Kirta wakes up, and he sets about the sacrifices that El has told him to make.
Yeah, I love how the fact that it's interesting that what makes her so beautiful is that she apparently has blue eyes, like very, very blue eyes. And then
very
I love,
white
It
eyeballs.
doesn't have jaundice. Yeah, it doesn't have jaundice.
Yeah, that's right. And her eyeballs are gleaming alabaster. Like that's quite the compliment. Like, oh, the whites of your eyes are super white, lady. You know.
It's not impossible to imagine something like that in the song, the Song of Songs, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's up there with cow-eyed Hera.
Yes, cow-eyed Hera.
Yeah. So the point of this, right, is that El is telling him in this dream, you need to go and attack this other city and take the daughter of the king, who will hand her over basically so you don't trash his God-given city, you know, which is such a glorious thing, right? I mean, this is really the moment. This is really the moment you can tell this is not a Christian story. Like, oh, here's what you do about being childless. You go steal, you know, somebody else's daughter.
It was definitely this and not the sacrifices earlier that gave it away.
Right, exactly.
Cyrus to a pagan god. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and he compares her, of course, to two of the, so there are three main goddesses among the Canaanites. Ashera, who we're going to get to later in the story. And then Anat and Astarte, who we get here. Anat is Baal's sister / wife.
She's a little scary.
She's super duper scary.
She is the goddess of love and war. Which gives you an idea, in addition to this story, of how they saw love.
Yeah, imagine Aphrodite and Ares being one god, you guys.
Yeah,
like, imagine that. Now, and we should have to say Aphrodite is not the goddess of love; she's the goddess of seduction. It's just true,
Well,
you know.
So, but the way that they're linked in a knot is the idea of sort of passion and conquest,
Right.
Yeah.
and you know, something about the two times I guess where you get your blood up are sexually and in battle, right? Like
rapaciousness.
those are sort of linked, right, together and put into this feminine form. And then Astarte is, we primarily see her actually in magical texts.
Mm-hmm.
She is invoked a lot for all kinds of things, right? All kinds of assistance, which probably means she was seen as sort of lower ranking.
Oh, kind of like a witch of sorts.
Right. Well, no, witches would have a relationship with her.
Okay. Oh, so maybe like
There's a firm hierarchy going on
Hecate.
here.
Is it Hecate? Is she the sort of witch goddess that you see in the Greek world? This kind of figure? Okay.
Yeah. So there's a firm kind of hierarchy here, right? Like, so we were saying the reason Keret or Kirta can talk to El is that he's sort of in the divine category. If you're not in the divine category, El, and even El has to ask him, like, what's going on with you? Why are you so upset, right? Like, he doesn't really keep up with what's going on, right? He's a deadbeat dad.
Well, he's got 70 sons, you know, I mean, it's hard to keep track of all those kids.
Right. And then you've got sort of Baal, who's like the highest ranked guy who humans have sort of access to.
Yeah.
But he's at the top of that. And the access is like just sort of worshiping and adoring up toward, right, toward Baal. So somebody who you can manipulate and get to do things and do favors for you, right, as a human. Not as Keret, right? Keret could get Baal to do things for him because he's, you know, close. But would be someone like Astarte, right? Or some of the other low-ranking folks. They're low enough down the totem pole that they're closer to humanity and might care, be willing to interact with you.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to column 4 on tablet 1. So I'm going to summarize a little bit again. So Keret, he makes all these sacrifices, so he's awake now, it's all been a dream, like the end of which season is it of Dallas? It was all a dream. He wakes up, he goes, he makes all the sacrifices like El told him to. And all the poetry from column 2 where he, recites all these things to the king Pabuli, or I'm not sure how to pronounce this either. That gets basically repeated because he actually goes and says this now. He does all the things that El told him to do. And so they march with the army for 3 days and then he stops. And then it says this. This is a really important point in the story. He arrives at the shrine of Ashera of Tyre, at the shrine of the goddess of Sidon. He there makes, so this is Lebanon,
Yeah.
He there makes a vow, Kirta the noble, as Ashera of Tyrians lives, the goddess of the Sidonians, if I take Horiah into my palace and have the girl enter my court, her 2 parts I'll make silver, her 3rd part I'll make gold. So he's making this vow. It's not super clear to me exactly what this vow is. Is he saying, I'm going to make a big donation to Ashera's shrine? Or is he saying, I'm going to make like a golden and silver statue of Asherah?
Yeah.
Like what exactly
is he talking about making an idol?
He's making an idol
of gold and silver.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is basically, if I get the girl, I'm going to make a big donation of this idol, this glorious gold and silver idol to the Ashera shrine.
So the her there is Ashera. Her 2 parts.
Her 2 parts.
Talking about Ashera.
Yeah.
And so
why would he call upon her in particular? And why would he make this vow here?
Yeah. So Ashera, since we're talking about goddesses, this is the 3rd goddess. The term Ashera gets used 3 different ways.
Right.
So we have to distinguish that. So it is used, it's sort of like Baal, right? Baal means Lord or Master.
Lord, yeah.
So you will get it used as a generic. So you could talk about Baals plural, like the Baalim in the Old Testament, as just a reference to like pagan gods. Asherah's plural could be used just to refer to pagan goddesses.
Yeah.
Right. Then there's Ashera, sort of the way there's Baal, and El. I mean, El's just the word for God, right?
Right.
So there's Ashera, the sort of individual goddess. And then Ashera was also used as just a noun to refer to the cultic objects by which Ashera was worshipped, which are politely large carved phalluses. These started out as sacred trees within groves that would be decorated or carved, and then evolved over time into more and more elaborate things. Those are often just referred to as Asherahs.
Yeah.
Right. Just as sort of like locution, and the King James translates it as a pole.
Yes.
An Asherah pole.
Yes.
That's which are cut down, which are destroyed, right? When people go to destroy them. So your typical shrines were just on the top of hills, and you'd have sort of a grove with one of these sacred trees or
now, is that the actual origin of maypoles, or is that just something that my Protestant upbringing taught me?
My guess would be that was a Protestant thing.
Okay.
I don't think you could draw a direct through line.
That satanic
or what
panic
the
is
maypoles in your town looked like. Yeah.
I love the imagination of the satanic panic. It came up with all kinds of weird, like, oh look, there's this and this. They're shaped roughly the same. They must be connected. You know?
Right.
Christmas
Eastern
trees came
Ishtar
from ancient
sound,
Babylon.
Eastern Ishtar sound identical. Yeah, that was the other thing. There was somebody at my old church for a while that was passing around this tape that they'd gotten from somebody that was like, oh, Christmas trees are actually Ashera poles. You know, these are the things you have to deal with as a pastor.
Because it's a tree.
No, guys, no.
Not every tree is. Sometimes, to quote someone who I prefer not to quote, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Yeah. But not if it's an Ashera pole.
That's right.
Yeah. So This is talking about the goddess. So Ashera is properly speaking the wife of El.
Okay.
However, she had a prolonged sexual relationship with her son Baal.
Like you do.
Again,
in the stories.
This is ancient paganism.
Well, and this is part of that motif we already mentioned of sort of Baal usurping El's
right. Yeah, and
position.
the ancient world, this comes up several times in the Old Testament, but the way to take your father's place as the head of the family is to basically like take his wives, take his concubines.
Yeah, because if you control
Absalom.
If you control the fertility, you control the kingdom. Right? I mean, this even comes up in the Arthur stuff. We'll talk about this, I'm sure, at some point, Richard. Like I'm blanking on his name now. Who tries to take Guinevere, not Lancelot, but
the other guy.
Yeah, the other guy, the bastard son.
You're talking about Mordred. Because there's somebody else who also takes Guinevere. But in any case,
I know, it's just the thing.
She got
the sort of idea of if you take the queen, you have the kingdom.
Yeah.
Is part of what's going on. So why would Ashera is the idea that it's about restoring fertility and controlling fertility? Is that why he's making this vow to her in particular?
Well, it's connected to that. Also, again, he sort of has access to her, right? And Baal and Ashera worship were sort of coupled.
Pun intended.
Because Baal, of course, is the god of the storm, meaning rain, right? Ashera is the feminine side, so you want fertile soil, right?
Gotcha.
And when it comes to sexual fertility in general, you have to remember that in the ancient world, they didn't think that male infertility existed.
Right.
They only thought that female infertility existed. And so this ends up, as we'll see, slight spoilers, being a problematic move. And part of the reason it's a problematic move is that he was told he was going to get this woman, to be his wife, to give him an heir, right? Like that's the purpose.
Yeah.
Right. And he's sort of like hedging his bets here to be like, well, I need to make sure she's fertile.
Oh.
Right. I'm going to also kind of go over here. Because remember, it's not like these gods all got along with each other.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Because he's promised by El, you're going to get this woman.
Right.
Just do this and you're going to get her.
For
but
the
then
purpose
he's like,
of giving you heirs. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, I'm going to summarize columns 5 and 6, partly because it's ridiculously fragmentary, but it's also pretty repetitive from what we've already seen. So you're kind of not missing too much. And then I'm going to summarize column 1 as well, which has a lot of stuff missing from tablet 2, and then we'll move in. So in columns 5 and 6 of tablet 1, Keret or Kirta, he goes and he attacks the towns around Udum, just like his dad told him to. And everything happens just like it did in the dream. So that's why there's all this repetition. And that's why the fact that it's really fragmentary is not a huge problem in terms of trying to read the text. So then, okay, now we're moving on to tablet 2. And I mean, it's probably not like these tablets were found lined up or whatever, but we've been sort of scholars are able to guess based on the contents. Like, oh, these are links.
Connect them.
Yeah, exactly. So in tablet 2, column 1, there's about 40 lines missing there. And scholars think that what's happening in those lines is that Pabuli, the king of Udum, is handing over Hariah to Keret as demanded. And then also, and this is part of what's there, this is why they think this, he's lamenting that Udum has to give up this very virtuous princess, who it says about her is she feeds the hungry, she gives drink to the thirsty. So the idea is that she's a virtuous woman who does the things that a woman should do, and he has to lose, this gorgeous lapis lazuli-eyed alabaster eye whites, lose her to Kirta. So then that brings us to column 2. of Tablet 2. And Richard, why don't you go ahead and tell us what happens here?
All right, so Kirta brings Huraya to back home and holds a great big feast, invites all the gods, except for the goddess Discord, who does not get... Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. That's a different thing. Okay.
Discord,
right,
isn't that for video game discussions?
Yeah,
isn't that what's going on? Yeah.
All right, so Almighty Ball, Prince Yarik, Kuthar Wakasis, Rame, Prince Reshap, a party of gods, a third. Right then, noble Kirta puts a doorman at his house. To enter his house, he allows. To exit his house, he does not. A sort of a Hotel California situation. Yes. Once the party of the gods arrived, he upspeaks Almighty Baal. Do not, kind El the compassionate, depart. Won't you bless the noble Kirta, prosper the pleasant lad of El? El holds a cup in his hand, a chalice he holds in his right. He blesses, yes, blesses his servant. El blesses Kirta, the noble, prospers the pleasant lad of El. The wife you have taken, O Kirta, the wife to your palace you've taken, the girl you brought into your court. 7 children to you she will bear, 8 she will bear to you 8. She will bear you the lad Yasib, who will draw on the milk of Astarte and suck at the breast of the maid Anath, the wet nurses of the gods.
There's a lot going on in this. Again, lots of god references and some new names. I recognize Kuthar Wakasis. He comes up in the Baal cycle, right? Is that another name for? Is that one of the messengers of Yam? I'm trying to remember now.
No, Kothar he's a god of craftsmanship, basically techne.
Okay, so he's like the smith god.
No, he's not really smith because it's everything. He mainly shows up in the Baal cycle to be the guy who builds the palace.
Okay. Architect.
So that's when I say craftsman, it's like covers a lot of ground, right? That's so you imagine artisans of different kinds and stuff. Like that's his.
Is this? I mean, so is this? It's described as a big feast for the gods. Is this a massive sacrifice? Is that what's going on here?
Yes, these would be This would be the way that they would understand what happens to the sacrifices in the city. Is that the divine assembly gathers and has a feast?
Yeah,
with their offerings, and their sacrificial feasts, their ritual feasts, were sort of a participation in that. You know, they're at the little kids' table off in the kitchen.
I really am sorry for. Nice. I really am sorry for continually bringing things back to the Homeric poems, but I mean, there's this whole thing that you find, for instance, in the Odyssey, where Zeus and the other gods run off to Ethiopia. You know, the end of the world. Why? Because they're holding a huge feast for the gods in Ethiopia, but it's basically they're going to partake of the sacrifices, right? And it's very explicitly clear in the text.
Yeah. Another thing I've noticed here is, and I feel like this. My sense is there's this sort of Semitic poetic trope where he says, 7 children you'll have, 8, and 8 you'll have 8. Like, isn't there like? Yes. Like I remember a number of things from the Bible. There's 2 things that God hates and a third. You know, there's often like it's
6 things does the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him.
Yeah. What is that all about? Is that just an emphatic or just like a poetic?
4 times you shall not count, and 5 is right out.
Yeah. So it is a poetic device, right? But it's also a way of emphasizing a point, right? It's not meant to be like a literal like. Here's a complete list of the things that will, you know, that God finds to be abominable, right? But it's sort of to emphasize, right? I have a great analogy, but neither of you will get it because it's to British drill rap.
How great an analogy maybe someone in our audience. We have a lot of nerds in our audience, so just throw it out there, and you know,
British drill rap.
Sure, I mean I don't care. I won't get it. But
two things for sure, one thing's for certain.
I know all three of those words, but when you combine them in that order, it doesn't mean anything to me.
You don't know what that means.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we've met
so
some.
it's an emphatic poetic.
So we've met some of these gods before. We've met some of these gods before. We know who Reshef is. We know who Baal is. You just explained who Kuthar is. But you got Yarik or Yerik or whatever, and then Rahme. Who are these gods?
Those are the gods of particular cities.
Okay.
Major cities. So
is this kind of emphasizing, like, and there was a party and everybody was there?
Yeah. That everyone is on the same page. Right. So remember where we're hearing how sort of accursed he is, he sort of had some of those gods like against him. Yeah. Right. But now everyone has sort of come together. Now there's harmony. Right. So that harmony is a depiction of, you have to think about how they thought about justice. And we're going to see the opposite of this here in a little bit in the same story. Right. Now everything is sort of right with the world. Right. The land is at peace. Everybody's growing crops.
Yeah. Right? So this is civilization. Kids. Civilization is okay.
Yeah. And this is the king's job. Right. The king's job is to sort of, and so part of the problem.
The king is the high priest.
Right. And his job is therefore to try and get everybody on this and get everybody.
Yeah. Right. So what's this weird bit at the end of this passage where it says that the children that he's going to have are going to be nursed by Anat and Astarte? What is that all about?
They're going to be divine children, right? This is why he had to go marry a king's daughter.
He couldn't just grab some girl.
Right, because then the divinity would keep getting diluted. Right? So the idea is they, like you, these are going to be divine children. They're going to be part of this group, not just humans.
That's cool.
Right. And so, yeah, that's the whole, I don't know if I'd want to be nursed by a knot. Sounds like.
Yeah.
Probably be fighting a battle or something while doing it. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We're gonna keep moving on with that image in everybody's mind. Like, don't Google images of a knot, you guys. A knot is super scary. Okay. So in column 3, there's lots of lines missing. But it seems that El goes on. So he names one son that Kirta's going to have, Yasib, and then he goes on to name another one whose name is Ilha'u or something like that.
Yeah. So his kids' names they're numbered.
Oh, so it's like 1, 2.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Primus, Secundus.
Yes.
Tertius, it is exactly that.
Quartus. Okay, that. Gotcha. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and then you gotta really wonder when there are people like running around with names like Decius. It's like, whoo.
If you read the scholarly apparatus, right? They on the critical edition they point this out, but they just assume you know Latin. So like they give the name of his eighth child who's a daughter, and they say like the big long name, and they say that is Octavia.
Octavia, nice. Yeah. So
like,
right. So
number 8. Okay.
My favorite books of philological scholarship will have like the primary text in German, but all the footnotes are in Latin.
In Latin, yeah.
And it's just sort of like obviously you can and it's just so funny to me that they're like, yeah, we'll put the footnote in Latin to make it, I guess, more widely accessible. I don't know.
I mean, that once was true. So yeah, so he has 2 sons, Yasib and Ilha'u, and then he also has 6 daughters, right? And then El blesses him a couple of times with basically the same lines. And this is what El says. This is in column 3. May you be much exalted, O Kirta, among the netherworld's shades. In the midst of Ditana's company, the youngest of them I name firstborn. I have questions about all this. But just to summarize, so the gods, they go back home, and over the next years, all the sons and the daughters are born just as El promised. And then, like this is the point where the camera then turns, like off, it cuts over to this other scene, and Ashera remembers the vow of Keret, which he did not fulfill, and so she punishes him with an illness. Okay, I want to know, what is the deal with being blessed among the netherworld?
This is
shades?
exactly like the book of Joshua. I mean, I just can't get over how similar these things are.
Yes.
And Datana's company, and then the youngest being named firstborn. And does that come back? Like, I feel like it doesn't come back.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll get to the end. I don't know. What's going on here? There's a lot in these 4 lines.
Right. So he's talking about the Rephaim.
Okay. All right.
Literally.
The giants.
The Rephaim.
The spirits of the giants.
Dead kings.
Yeah, the spirits of the dead kings.
The shades of the dead kings in the netherworld. So this is one of the... You see this in the Epic of Gilgamesh, too. In the ancient world, even the king, who is divine, still dies. It goes to the netherworld. Like, a lot of the Epic of Gilgamesh is about him trying to escape that fate.
We should. I think. Right. I mean, I'm just going to throw this out here now. Would you be willing to come back and talk about Gilgamesh with us in a future episode?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Good.
I mean,
got him on. We got him. We got him committed. Everybody.
So.
Oh, you can just imagine the wrestling promo we're going to cut for Gilgamesh, like.
And Enkidu. Yes.
And Enkidu. That's what I'm saying.
Who, by the way, was recently revealed in Marvel Comics to be the original Hulk.
Oh.
Really?
Yes, he was the Incredible Hulk of the ancient world.
Huh.
So, but yeah, so Gilgamesh is trying to avoid his mortality.
Yeah,
right, is sort of the whole story. That's also what's going on here, right? But in another sense, because the check against your mortality is having an heir.
Yeah.
Right. And in particular, a major part of the cult at Ugarit was making these offerings to and for the Rephaim. The spirits of these dead kings. Well, if his royal line ends with no heir, there's going to be no one to make those offerings for him in the underworld.
And the giants could rise up and do horrible things.
He'll be forgotten, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why this is coming up here, right? So, no, you're going to have these children, the line will continue, and so you will, even though, yes, you are going to die and go into the underworld, you will be in sort of the elite cast of, quasi-divine beings in the underworld. So, yeah, that's what's going on there.
What's Datana's company? Like, what is that? Is that
Datana
just
is one of the gods of the underworld.
Yeah. What does it mean when it says the youngest of them I name firstborn?
Yeah, that's my other question, because I feel like that doesn't actually come to fruition. Okay.
Which does.
Okay.
That's sort of the last act of this is based on the fact that El has, and this is actually a biblical parallel.
I was going to say, you always got to watch these youngest sons in ancient,
like Genesis, the patriarchal narratives, right? Well, this is his daughter. This is actually his daughter, the eighth child, the daughter, who El says is going to be considered the firstborn, like the heir.
Okay.
So this is like transgressing. See, there are these transgressions he commits.
Lots of things.
Right? We're about to talk about one, the oath. But now there's going to be this transgression of naming a daughter and the youngest daughter the heir that are going to then have consequences.
Okay.
Later on in the story.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't clear to me how that actually works out. So I'll need that explained probably when we get there.
Okay.
So, there's 3 more columns on this tablet. But we're going to just summarize these because we kind of move forward in the story. So I'm just going to read. So Keret gets sick because Ashera curses him. She punishes him because he didn't fulfill this vow.
What was the vow? Did we already talk about
build the idol?
Yeah, the idol. To make build the idol.
Yeah.
So he's sick, and he summons Hariah, his new wife, to offer this big feast for all of his captains, his chiefs, his vassals, right? So at the end of the feast, some of them see that Keret is ailing, and so they want Yasib, who is the firstborn son, to rule over Hubur, which is their city. And then the feast continues, and then all of the vassals they're sort of weeping and lamenting over his illness. he's not dead, but they're unhappy, they're sad, and they figure, well, we need to get the succession squared away, because he could be dead soon, after all. So then that brings us to tablet number 3. And Richard, why don't you read us the sections we're going to cover on
one
this.
Note on that.
Oh, yeah.
It's important that when he gets sick, that also brings a famine on.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yep.
On the land.
Yep.
Right? Because again, this is the inverse of that justice idea.
Yeah.
Right? Now he's sick and the land is sick because it's connected to him as the king, right?
Yeah.
So there is this problem again that now needs to be rectified.
Everybody has it. Yep. Yeah, and that'll come up again a little bit later.
Yeah.
In the third tablet. So now we're on to tablet 3. This is the third and final tablet, everybody. So it's Act 3 of our story. So what's in column 1 there, Richard?
Yeah. So Elihu begins rehearsing the lines he's going to speak over his ailing father, like you do. He says, like a dog, you pass into your tomb, like a cur, even into your grave. How can you, father, die like a mortal? Your grave, will it pass into dirges? To a woman's song, father of heights? Baal's mountain will weep for you, father. Mount Zaphon, the holy domain. Mount Nani, the mighty domain. But Kirta's a scion of El, son of the gentle and holy one. And then he recites the lines that he just practiced. But he also adds, is Kirta not called a scion of El, son of the gentle and holy one? Gods, after all, do they die? The gentle one's son, won't he live? And then Keret then tells Elihu to go find his sister Thitmanit so that she can come and mourn over him, but not to tell her that he is sick. And so Elihu obeys and brings her back.
So,
yeah.
I was going to say, okay, Mount Zaphon, right? This is the mountain of assembly that's being referenced, the place where Baal kind of rules the gods.
Right, the mountain in the north.
The mountain up in the north. What is
Which is
Mount
an actual
Nani?
mountain.
Yeah.
The sides of the north, one might say.
So is Mount Nani, is that another name for the same place? Or is that another mountain?
Yeah. No, it's another name for the same place. Yeah.
Right. So it's interesting.
Yeah,
so here, Ilhau is wondering, wait, I thought my father was divine. How can he die? Are you going to die like a dog? Literally, are you going to die like a dog? It's interesting that saying is this old, to die like a dog. Yeah. I mean, what don't they know that this is what happens even for divine sons, part human sons that they die? Or what's going on here?
I mean, objectively, they knew kings die, right? But part of this is just a trope of mourning. But part of this is also, you got to remember, they literally worshipped him as a god. He's literally an idol to them in a very literal sense, right? And so just sort of the idea that, when they'd finally tell me William Shatner died, I won't believe it, right? How
These
could this
two
be
things
possible?
are exactly equivalent.
Yes. Hey, he's from Canada, Great White North, That's, but yeah, so I think it's more of a disbelief, right? How can this be, right? That
Yeah. So in the next column, so Thitmanit, or how, again, who knows how to pronounce these names, but the youngest daughter.
It's more of a heat, but yeah.
Thitmanit. She comes back and sees that her father is ill. And, of course, he didn't tell her that because he was being obedient to Dad, who said, don't tell her. She sees he's ill. She complains at her brother for not telling her. And then she mourns over Keret with the same words that her brother had recited over him in column 1. So you see basically the same set of poetry gets it's 3 times in
and
the
that
epic.
may have been something that was used.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was
a liturgical text.
Ugaritic last rites, yeah.
Yeah. So then, so moving on to column 3 then, again, there's a bunch of lines that are missing. This is another fragmentary bit. But one of the things that is referenced is as Father, as you said, there's a sympathetic drought. Like the king is sick, and so the land is sick. This happens in the land. And so then El, it seems, again, scholars think, sends one of the gods to go and investigate what's going on in the land. Why is everyone dying? Because once again, he's got 70 kids. He can't keep track of all of them.
Yeah.
I've heard bad things are happening down there in Kubur. And one of the things that El says to the scout is, he says, look to the earth for Baal's rain, to the field for the Most High's rain. So good for the earth is Baal's rain, and for the field the Most High's rain. So good for the wheat in the plowland. The emmer in the furrows. Now, emmer is a kind of grain. Mm-hmm. For the wheat crowns in the tilth, which is a good old-fashioned word for the tilled land, the tillage. They raise their heads, the plowmen do, up toward the servant of Dagon. The food is all spent from its storage. The wine is all spent from its skins. The oil is all spent from its casks. The house of Kirta. Right? So he sends them out and he says, go look. And then the plowmen are all like saying, all the food is gone. Famine is happening. And there's, not much rejoicing. So, yeah.
The opposite.
Yes. Yeah. So this is not just the king's problem now. This is everybody's problem.
Right. Because all these things are connected.
Right. Like there's this idea of what they call sacral kingship, I think.
Yeah.
That the state of the king is the state of the kingdom.
Right.
You can go read Till We Have Faces.
Right.
Some good examples of this.
This is exactly the same kind of thing.
And he's sort of the pivot point, right? Between.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, also that seems to really be the case with the Davidic kingship, even in ancient Israel.
Sure. Yep.
Because it's imaging rather than instead of bottom up, it's top down. But
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Richard, why don't you tell us? We're going to summarize column 4 and then parts of column 5. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what's going on there, and then read the bits from column 5 that we're going to.
Yeah. So we got a lot of bits missing from column 4 from the beginning and the end, but it seems like El speaks with a scout that he sent to investigate the drought. And he says, okay, well, go summon Elish, who's the herald of Baal's house, also a god, along with Elish's goddess wife, who's also a herald.
Wives.
And
plural.
Wives, I'm sorry. Yes.
Of course.
Who will be sent up the mountain to proclaim something.
We don't know what it is.
It kind of seems in context maybe something like they're calling together an assembly of the gods or something like that, but it's hard to say.
Or maybe Baal come and send some rain, or I don't know.
Yeah. So the gods, so call them. Yeah, go ahead, Father.
I was going to say, these are prophets of Baal.
Okay.
These are the guys who show up, right? Like
with Elijah. Yeah.
Call him louder.
Actually, so I have a question about from the previous column. It makes reference to Baal being most high. Like I thought El is the most high. Is this just a title that's a little slippery?
Same text. It is, but Baal and El, right? It's Baal is the most high if you're a human, right? The most high you could get to. Because again, you see this disconnect with El. He's like, "What's going on Earth? I need to send one of these lower rank gods to go tell me."
I was doom scrolling on X. I can't get.
Yeah, well, I think
these kids on TikTok these days.
Some of the implication also seems to be like, if things have gotten to El, then it's like really bad. Like I shouldn't have to hear about this kind of a thing.
Like they literally consider El the god of gods, not just as a superlative, but literally.
Yeah.
Right. So he relates to the other gods the way Baal relates to humans.
Right.
Yeah. So,
they're sending prophets here. The reason for taking the wives is not that they were also going to prophesy. It's because they were going to do rituals together to get Baal's attention, to get him to send rain.
Right.
Yeah. As one.
Yeah. So that's fun. All right. So column 5, whatever is done seems to get the attention of the gods, who are all assembled now together in the presence of El. And El addresses them and asks apparently multiple times, who among them is able to cure disease, remove disease, etc. They're all silent, and then he says, "Stay seated, my sons, on your seats, on your elevated thrones. As for me, I'll use skills and create. I'll create a remover of illness, a dispeller of disease." So he fills his hands with soil, with good soil, fills his fingers. He pinches off some clay, and it seems, in the following lines, which are all broken and missing, that El creates a female figure named Shatakat, who and commissions her over a cup of wine, telling her to go forth and heal this disease.
Yeah, and we have a little philological note that name Shatakat or Shatakat or whatever, it means female remover of disease. So like nurse,
on the nose.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Physicianette.
Nurse.
Nurse. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's sort of this isn't him creating a new line of humans. This is more like a golem.
Wait, a golem? Like
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not a golem. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
not a golem. It's
hobbit.
a different podcast that we
Golem,
He's obsessed with jewelry. Yeah. So like a golem. Yeah. So she's like a construct, right, with this purpose, right, to go.
Does she show up other places in Ugaritic literature?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
But if they used that term, it would be hard to tell if they were talking about the same figure or just like a woman who's good at curing illnesses, right?
I seem to remember, and I don't know why I remember this, and so I'll, if I'm found to be wrong later, it's just me remembering something I read like 10 years ago. But I seem to remember that this is like a given name in like Phoenician culture for women sometimes. Like this Shatakat. Like it's like a relatively common given name for women later on.
Yeah. Theophoric names are very very common.
Yeah.
But in this case, she's sort of this construct to do this purpose because none of the gods volunteer. And probably the reason none of the gods volunteer is that they know Ashera is the one who did it. They don't want to run afoul of her, but El sort of doesn't care.
Yeah, so why doesn't El basically say, "Look, buddy, you need to go and do the thing that you said you were going to do"? Or is he like so, such an invalid now that he can't even do that?
He's so detached, he doesn't even know what's going on or why.
Yeah, it's like, they're sick down there. Let me make one of these.
Which one of you will go do it?
And then she goes and makes one of those. Is the fun thing?
Yeah. So, all right. So we get in column 6. So now the final. This is the last column of the last tablet. This is the big finale. So there's actually two things that happen here, and we're going to read the first one. And this is Shatakat getting sent forth by El to go do what is he created her to do. So you get this: death be shattered, Shatakat be triumphant. Shatakat then departs the house of Kirta. She enters. She penetrates and enters. She enters all the way in. She swoops like a kite over villages, swoops like a flyer over towns.
Kite with the bird, not the little.
Yeah. With a wand, she unbinds the knot, and thus the disease from his head returns and washes him clean of sweat. She opens his throat up for eating. She opens his gullet to dine. Death is shattered. Shatakat triumphant. And so he's healed. Keret is healed. And then he tells, he's hungry. He tells Horiah, his wife, to make him some lamb to eat, and she does so. So you'd think the end, right? Like this seems like it's the end of the story.
Now, am I misremembering? I thought I remembered for sure that as part of healing him, she made her own little clay doll. And there was like a sympathetic magic. Maybe that's not in this version of the story. Okay, all right, never mind.
It is interesting to me, like now that I'm thinking about this, like there's this idea that she's flying around doing this.
Yeah,
this is almost like the angel of death. It's an inverted version of
the being. Yes, she's like this supernatural. That's what I'm saying. It's not. He doesn't just make a new human, right? She's sort of a quasi-divine creature, right?
Yeah.
And she's got a wand, which like the wand or the staff as like the rod of healing that's a super old image.
Yeah. Okay, so now, like I said, it seems this is like a Tolkien story. It ends like multiple times.
It's like
it
Great
seems
Conklin.
like there you go. That's right. There's multiple dismissals.
Hey, I have questions about. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead. Continue.
So it seems like this should be the end, but it's not. It's not the end. So Richard, why don't you give us what actually does happen here at the end? It's not just, okay, I feel better, let's eat. Something else occurs.
Yeah, so meanwhile, Yasib feels his spirit giving him some words.
And this is firstborn son here, you see.
Yeah, firstborn son. So he comes into Keret's presence and he speaks them to him. He says, Yasib the young departs. He enters his father's presence. He raises his voice and proclaims, Hear now, O noble Kirta, hearken, alert your ear. In time of attack you take flight and lie low in the mountains. You've let your hand fall to vice. You don't pursue the widow's case. You don't take up the wretched's claim. You don't expel the poor's oppressor. You don't feed the orphan who faces you, nor the widow who stands at your back. Your sickbed is your consort, your infirmity, your company. Step down, and I'll be king. From your rule, and I'll sit on the throne. Noble Kirta answers, May Horon crack, my son, may Horon crack your head. Astarte named with Baal your skull. May you fall at the peak of your years. Be subdued while you still can make a fist.
So what's going on here? Like, why? This is the part that reminded me of Psalm 82. Like, there's these accusations about, and it's interesting. The accusations are not about like you're weak, you're a loser. The accusations are you're not taking care of the poor and the widow and the downtrodden. Which, like,
you're not a good king.
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
That's interesting. What is going on here? Why does his son come in with all these accusations?
Okay, so there's a thread that I don't know if you followed through here, right? That starts with that last daughter being the heir.
Okay.
Right. And then when they think he's dying, right? And the sons come in to like pronounce the last rites. That's like part of the succession thing.
Okay.
And they don't tell her, but then she does it. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So that was part of her then succeeding him.
Okay.
So what kind of gets revealed here at the end is that the firstborn son was plotting to ignore what had been said and sort of take over when he died. So he's bummed out that his dad didn't actually die.
Yeah.
So that he could take over because he was plotting to...
The things that he's accusing his father of is basically saying, you were too sick to set the world in order, right?
Well, you were sick.
Yeah.
Why were you sick? Because you are an unjust man, and therefore, and that caused this famine. You can't bring justice to the land, right?
I got you.
That's your job as king.
Yep.
Is to maintain this justice and this right order of things, and you didn't do it, so you don't deserve to still be alive.
So, okay, so
Right.
is there any clear like textual connection between this and Psalm 82, or are they just kind of covering similar themes? For those who may not remember Psalm 82, God stands up in the council of the gods and accuses the rebel gods of not bringing justice to the fallen, the orphan, the widow, whatever.
Right.
Is just a thematic connection? Like, this is what a king should do, and you didn't do what a king should do?
In the ancient world. Yeah, in the ancient world.
That would be a cool thing to sing, maybe at Easter.
That was the job description of these divine kings. Right? That was their job description. Yeah. And so that's why you get the parallel, right?
Got it.
This is what they're supposed to be doing. And he's saying, you didn't do it, so you don't deserve to live. You don't deserve to be king anymore. You need to essentially abdicate and just let me take over.
Wow.
Right? And so then he curses that son because he's not the one who's supposed to inherit anyway. And for plotting against him and for cursing his father, he curses him. And there are a lot of scholars who try to argue this isn't the actual end because it seems weird.
Yeah.
But there are many scholars, and I agree with this position, that it is the end, because the idea is there's a certain tragic irony, because we began with, I need to have an heir. I need to have a firstborn son to carry on for me. And it ends with him cursing his son to die in his youth.
Yeah.
Once he has one.
Yeah, and when he says, may Horon crack your head, Horon is like this underworld god. So he's basically saying, like, the devil take you.
Yeah.
You know, effectively.
Be cut down at the height of your days. Yes. Like, die in your youth. Right? So that's a very ironic, right? Like, he got what he wanted, and maybe it's not what he wanted.
Right? It's very dark. Yeah.
At the end of the day. Which is, when you read any Sumerian and Akkadian literature, it's all very dark like this, right? Like,
I've noticed that a common theme in a lot of ancient literature is that multiple sons can be more trouble than they are worth.
Yes. Yes. But there's also sort of, there are not just the oath break. Like, we can all understand why the oath breaking, right, would be a big issue, right?
Sure.
And why this goddess, you know, especially a petty one, would get angry, right, that you broke an oath and punish you. But by fiddling with the line of succession, right, there's been, that too is seen as part of the natural order of things. And the fact that he's deviating from the natural order of things, it's not just that it's the 8th child and the youngest child, it's a daughter.
Right.
Right, not a son. Right, who he chooses to be his heir. So there's this sort of violation of the natural order of things, which then creates all these sort of ripple effects of injustice that sort of come back to haunt him. Think about, you know, David and a couple of his sons.
Yeah.
But Absalom in particular, right? That something happens where there's a breach of what is right and what is justice by the king, and that sort of has then these ripple effects starting in his own family, right, that play out. And so the Keret is listed in one of the king's lists of Ugarit, even though the city here isn't Ugarit.
Why would they do that?
So, well, because they're kind of adopting him. Right? Like I said, it seems like he was probably a Hurrian originally, right? So not even ethnically the same, right? Not even. But he's sort of been made, this has been made a story of Ugarit.
So, well, that's interesting because, like, you might think that this is a kind of cautionary tale. Like, why would you want this guy to be one of your sort of founder figures?
Yeah. Well, there is see, using the word natural, because this includes the quote-unquote supernatural, but there is an order to things. There is an order to the world. There is a hierarchy. There is a way that these things are to occur.
Yeah.
Okay.
That not only humans need to follow, right? This isn't a divine command thing where the gods have issued these laws and humans have to follow them. The gods have to follow them or there are consequences.
They're subject to these laws themselves.
Right. This is just the way the universe works, right? And so, you know, person hearing this story told in Ugarit or by the Hurrians is not a king, right? And so isn't going to face this same kind of dilemma, right? But needs to understand that there is this natural order of things. When you make a vow to someone higher, you keep it, right? In the way things proceed in your family, you follow, right? If that order gets broken, there will be dire consequences, not just for you, but for everyone, right? In the society, in the culture, in the city.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you tell us if there are any direct, other than the obvious fact that the Book of Joshua is completely plagiarized from the story that we've just read? No, but could you tell us if there have been any sort of like any aids to reading and understanding biblical texts that come from this epic, Father?
Yeah, that was kind of my question too. And relatedly, are there any references to this story that we're aware of in the Bible?
Yeah, not direct ones.
Okay.
There are motifs, and we've pointed out some of those, like Job at the beginning.
Yeah. And
even then, he gets children back at the end, right?
Yeah.
Although it's through a very different process. And Psalm 82 there at the end, a lot of things about the divine kingship and the David story. Some of the motifs of family usurpation. But this is, and there's also sort of on the flip side, right? You can see some of the things that some of the biblical texts are reacting against in terms of the view of the divine, right? This is one of the reasons why the freedom of the God of Israel is sort of reiterated over and over again in the prophets, is that he isn't bound by some kind of necessity. He's not a man. He doesn't die. He doesn't have these things. He's not subject to these things. Whatever he wills, it comes to pass. Right? Whatever he does, whatever he desires. There's no sort of limitation. Right? And so there's that negative reflection, and also, of course, there are some divine council scenes in the Old Testament that are kind of similar, like when God is going to take out Ahab, and he says to the spirits, which one of you wants to, in that case one volunteers, but wants to go and deceive.
With the inverse of El saying, okay, who's going to go heal Keret, it's God saying who's going to go take out Ahab. Yeah. So all right, well, we're going to look in on the chat. A lot of the things being said in the chat we kind of addressed in our conversation, but there was one thing we didn't, which is a goose asked the question. This is for Father Stephen. I have a question for Father Stephen. I hope not.
But is he on the loose?
I have a question for Father Stephen. Is that his real YouTube channel that is posting Marvel Rivals videos?
That is a real YouTube channel, yes.
Okay. Confirmed.
It is actually there on the YouTubes.
Yeah. I feel like there's actually some fun chatting about Sauron and Morgoth here in this.
And apparently drill rap, which...
and drill rap.
I guess I'm not up.
Are they explaining it to you? Are they?
No. They're just like, oh, look.
Someone was very surprised that apparently you listen to drill rap. Yes. Alem says, LOL, Father Stephen listens to drill. And then respect. So there you go. So even though Richard and I have no idea what you were talking about, clearly...
And received no respect, therefore.
That's right.
I get no respect, actually, as it happens.
Wow.
Rodney, that's your name. We go. Rodney. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah. Rodney, that's right.
Rodney Rohan.
Oh, man.
Exactly. So, all right. Well, I have to say, I love this conversation because for multiple reasons. Like, one is, again, I didn't do a whole bunch of research about this story. I just kind of went in cold. It was not clear to me that I thought that it was El saying that the youngest child, El was decreeing that the youngest child was going to be the heir or whatever. But apparently he was sort of just predicting that that's what was going to happen.
Right.
Not that he was okay. Right. Yeah. And then Thitmanet coming in and like doing this mourning over her father is setting her up to have that. Yeah, that's not. That's not. That was.
And that's why they didn't tell her. That's why they were like, "Don't tell her."
Yeah, and that's why she was like, kind of upset when she found out that she hadn't been told. Yeah.
But the other thing is that to me this is one of the takeaways, which is, okay, this is weird, ancient, obscure stuff that most people have never heard of. But folks, just dive in, read it, figure out, work on it. Like it's worth it to work through some of this stuff. Cause this is kind of a cool story, I think. Especially once you kind of dig into who the characters are and get some background as to who these gods are and what the deal is.
And Semitic poetry is kind of a vibe.
Yeah,
it is a vibe. Yeah. So we do have a question here for Father Stephen, which is kind of related to what Father Andrew just said.
Okay.
Which is, John asks, would you have any recommendations for books to read on Bronze Age literature and culture? What do you think about John Walton?
John Walton's stuff is a mixed bag, from my perspective.
Very
I'm saying mixed bag,
safe answer.
not as in, well, no, not as in like, you know, he's doing bad scholarship here and good scholarship there, but in this, I mean mixed bag in terms of whether I agree with it. I mean,
got it.
Not quality, right? So he's doing good scholarship. Lost World of Genesis 1, I think is really good and really helpful. I think his stuff on Joshua, I think, is just wrong-headed.
Is he one of the people that thinks that Joshua plagiarizes Epic of Keret?
No, he's not. No.
Okay.
No, but he's not like full-on anti-supernaturalist, right? But he tends to take a much less supernatural view, right? So like the whole giant clans, Nephilim thing isn't a significant part of his reading of the book of Joshua.
I gotcha.
Which I think is utterly wrong-headed, right? So that's what I mean by, right? So in terms of what I would recommend, I would recommend his Lost World of Genesis 1 to somebody. I wouldn't recommend his book on Joshua to somebody because I don't think it's accurate. I would start reading primary material if you're into.
Yep. That's always going to be the
literature.
Answer here, by the way.
Like,
people.
Yeah.
good old Ugaritic narrative poetry that I got Father Andrew to buy. And there's a big collection. It's a big, thick book called Before the Muses.
Yeah.
That's a big collection of Akkadian everything. Poetry, stories.
It's in a box up there right now. In the loft.
Up on the roof?
No, there's a loft
offerings.
up here. Yeah. There's a loft up here where I have most
where
of
you're
my
offering
box stuff.
sacrifices up on the roof of your Texas house.
I'm not doing that, just in case anybody's listening. That's part of my diocese. I just need to be very clear.
That's okay.
We're not doing that.
I mean, one of the good things is that everything. A lot is getting translated in English. You can just dive in, and most of the translations are pretty good. People aren't trying to falsify translations out there. They're just trying to translate.
People are always asking, what's the best translation to read this? Is this one safe? And I'm like, listen, when it comes to ancient stuff, I mean, if Penguin Classics has done a translation, it's probably fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. For casual reading, for your first introduction, it's probably fine.
Right.
And this isn't the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So,
it's not.
Nothing hinges on super precision, right?
And actually, even a lot of things in the Bible don't also hinge on super precision. Anyway, different podcast. Anyway,
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Father, thanks for coming on, and thanks for offering to do Gilgamesh with us in the future, and I don't know, God willing, we'll have you on multiple times to talk about especially anything pre 400 AD.
Right.
Yeah.
You're our guy for sure. Yeah.
Not interested.
Exactly. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We're actually we're planning to be back next week.
That's right.
So normally we would be a couple weeks, but I have some travel coming up, and so we're planning to come back next week.
Yep.
Thanks for coming everybody today for our discussion of the Epic of Keret. If you're edified by this conversation, please make sure that you like, subscribe, share, review. And this show's home is right here on YouTube, but we are also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts.
Shout out to a goose who just made a donation to the T-shirt fund. I don't know if it was 4 T-shirts, but we'll say it is.
Call it.
Yeah. He says it's not much, but thank you for the hours of research needed for these podcasts. Also, pray for John Cena's soul. He sold it. There you go. All right.
He did.
I love
to rock the
so
Dwayne
much.
Johnson.
I love you people so much. So if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you click the little bell when you subscribe so that you get notified every time that we put out a new episode, which is twice a month. In this particular case, again, we're going to do back-to-back weeks. Now, next time, we will be doing another Semitic poem. And it will be a Semitic poem which involves a divine council. But in next week's readings, the Semitic poem is going to be written in Ge'ez, and the divine council in question will be the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea. So we are going to take a trip to the Horn of Africa as we discuss the great Ethiopian national epic, the Kebra Nagast, the Glory of Kings, because people get excited when I talk about Ethiopia.
That said, farewell, and may you always trace the silhouette of virtue in everything that you read.
This has been a listener and viewer supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.